with Mark and Marina. So baby diatomist Vicky with my roommate, baby diatomist Sylvia. And we continue to do some mischief at Lakeside over the years. We co-taught the first high school diatom prep course a few years after this. And then for several years, we would come for like workaway weekends called the Psychological Research Consortium with some other folks who were in the area. And then shortly after 2010, I went to my first NADS in 2011 in Montana. I've been to most of them since. I think the only one I've missed is Maine, which I regret. I want to provide a little bit of context about the institution I currently work at, because when we're talking about undergraduate institutions or institutions in general, there are different types. And so where I work is going to have a large effect on my take and perspective on some of these topics. So I work at an institution in North Central Texas. The closest city is the Dallas-Fort Worth complex, which is a few hours north. And so we are rural, regional, and most of our students are from that direct area, although we're starting to expand. We are largely first-generation students, which means they're the first person in their family to go to college. We have a lot of non-traditional students that are balancing study and work and family. And we are right on the cusp of becoming a Hispanic serving institution. So we have a lot of, I know, we're really excited. So we have a lot of diversity in our students. So when it comes to programming, accessibility is always really high at the top of my mind, because I want to make sure that all of our students have the same opportunities to get the same experiences. All right. So the great thing about bachelor students is that they can be really enthusiastic, and a lot of times they have absolutely no idea what they want to do. And so you can talk them into doing all sorts of stuff. And these are some of my alumni from my undergraduate program. And one of the first things we'll talk about when they come asking about research opportunities is what kind of jobs you want to have, because that determines what kind of skills they need. Do they need more field work? Do they absolutely no interest in being in the field, but they want to go into genetics, and so they need to pipette things a lot? So what exactly are we talking about? And some of them go into grad school, but a lot of my students, the bachelor's is the only degree they expect to receive, and then they'll enter the workforce. The ones that do go into graduate programs are, we are a master's granting institution. We have a relatively small master's program at the moment, but when they graduate, a lot of them will stay in the state. They'll either go into the federal or state government water quality institutions, or they'll join environmental impact assessment companies as their careers. So their projects are usually oriented in that way as well. There is a change going on in higher education, though, that may affect some of this type of educational experience. So the general sequence that most of us probably went through is bachelor's to master's to PhD, and the master's was a stepping stone between the other two degrees, where you learn some critical knowledge and skills and gain confidence and training in the research area, so that when you begin your PhD, you have a lot more independence in the type of research that you're doing, and you can take on bigger questions and do bigger projects. My institution falls in the category of universities that are growing really quickly. I was part of a batch hire in 2016 because we were moving from being a primarily undergraduate institution and getting ready to become an R2. And so we went from 6,000 students to 10,000 students. So I was part of the hire to cover that gap. We are doing it again. So administration has announced that we're going to aim for R1 by, I think, 2028 is the date they've given us. And we are now at 18,000 students. So we've almost doubled. So it's a lot of growth really quickly, which means that there's a lot of emphasis on developing PhD programs. And there's some concern about the fate of the master's programs, because PhD programs, especially when they're developed really aggressively and quickly like that, cannibalize master's programs. Some of you may be at institutions that are going the other direction. They're getting smaller. And in some of those cases, master's programs are being cut because they are relatively small in terms of the students that they serve, and they can be quite expensive. So if we remove the master's program, that means that we have bachelors who need to be prepared to go straight into PhDs. So how do we best prepare them to take on that challenge directly, especially since PhDs are also getting shorter. We're not really on the 4 to 10 year span anymore. A lot of them want you out in 3 to 4 years. So you have to go in as a bachelor's, post-baccalaureate, like ready with some master's level training. So how do we do that on large scale, especially if we have a lot of students that we need to prepare in that way? So one of the ways that I approach this is I incorporate research into my classes. That also works well for me in terms of kind of time and effort, because since we teach a lot of classes, I teach 4 to 6 classes a semester. So that is the best place to do research in the classroom. That's because that's where I spend most of my time. So some of it can be relatively close. This is Proctor Reservoir, which is about half an hour away from us. And so we go there every semester for different classes and collect samples and take water chemistry data. This is the spillway behind the dam. And then we'll also take it on the lake side. So that was 2021, I believe. And then this is 2024. So it's interesting because the hydrology changes a little bit. Like this thing right here was where the puddle that they were wading in the few years before. And the water chemistry can change, the flora and fauna changes a little bit. So over time, that accumulates into a nice little data set that could someday be something. I also have a phycology class that does sort of a mini donor page. They don't make a page that they're going to publish on DONA. What they do is actually they use DONA so that they know how to use it. And they'll choose a Texas diatom and confirm the identity using some of the same steps that we use in the species treatment at the lakeside class. And so we do that for the area directly around the university. And then I also take them on a longer field trip to the Gulf Coast. So we go to different areas around Galveston, Houston, or Corpus Christi and take samples with permits from the state parks. And so we have these little voucher floras in development for several of the state parks on East Texas. So many of us probably do teaching like that, where you have these voucher floras that we're developing or these long-term data sets that we're developing. But I think we can make it better. And so ideally, we would start earlier. If a student has a small research project their senior year, that's a little late. Ideally, we would start earlier, potentially as early as first year in college. And it would also be good to provide continuity to that so that they get the experience of doing research over a long period of time. Tarleton is one of 400 institutions that have a program called CPhages that a couple of my colleagues run. And it's a really interesting program because the first semester, a small cohort of freshmen and sophomores apply to be in this class, and they collect environmental samples and they isolate bacteria, and then they culture the bacteria, and then they choose like 1 or 2 of the best cultures to continue. And then the second semester, they do gene sequencing on the bacteria, and they start to look at the code. And then the next year, they come back and do a third semester class where they do bioinformatics. And that usually leads to a publication. So by the time they're a sophomore or junior, they have a publication under their belt. And also, there's so much unexplored diversity in the bacteriophage world that there's plenty to be done there. So it'd be really cool if we could have something like C diatoms, where we could build these continuous courses that aren't even necessarily new courses. They still fulfill cores. It's just you are focusing a genetics class or an ecology class or something like that with a diatom-based research project as the main project, and it kind of centers some of that learning. The other thing that's becoming really popular in education is service learning. Good. So here's an example of one that I've done with a community partner. This is Fossil Room, which is a wildlife safari drive. And it was 2020, that's why everyone's masked. But they went and talked to the staff at Fossil Ram about a fishing pond that had gone defunct because the water quality became really poor. And they talked about what the staff wanted to do in terms of remediation. And then they split out into small groups and took samples from the pond and used protocols that were from the Texas State Water Quality Assessment. So they were actually using like real data sheets. And then they compiled that information wrote their own little reports, and then put that all into one big report. And we went back to fossil rim and presented the results and talked about the recommendations. That's really useful for students because it shows that the information we tell them in class and some of the techniques that we show them are actually useful and produce real data that mean something to a real person on the outside. And it's particularly good if you can find community partners that are ready to buy into these sorts of programs because they get something out of it and have a need you can fulfill. It's really difficult if you're kind of forcing your own agenda on them. It needs to be a little bit more mutually beneficial than that. Okay, I also want to put a shout out for study away and study abroad programs because those are also excellent. They're short, they're intensive. You can go from 0 to proficient relatively quickly. This is a study away I went on with David Hartwood, does a really excellent course for geology for educators. So he'll take students and educators around and teach them the basics of geology and like how to teach geology so that they're better equipped to do that in the future. I kind of tagged along right at the end of Nebraska, but it was really great. And then also study abroad's really great. I had several opportunities to study abroad as an undergraduate, and that was really transformative to my education. I rounded out my senior year by going to Belize to study tropical ecology with my undergraduate advisor, Dr. Carnes, and I knew I had made it when I accidentally dressed exactly the same way. And so there's a nice symmetry to the fact that now I get to go to Honduras to teach tropical ecology with my own students and I still have the same do-eyes. So the nice thing about study away and study abroad is that if you go to the same places over time, you can build little projects into that. So in the case of where we go in Roatan, we're hosted by our Marine Science Institute. And so we're now talking about how to create a couple of different questions, research questions that we can gather data from over time because they spend part of their second week there doing like actual field surveys. And over time, we could build those into little data sets that would also benefit the host because a lot of these locations don't necessarily have a lot of research infrastructure or support in their own right. And so that would be another potentially beneficial collaboration. I also love field stations, and they're really important as well. I'm not biased at all by the fact that there's a field station that Tarleton has called Timberlake, where I spend a lot of my time. And also Mary, if you saw her poster, that is her field site. Look how happy they are. Putting those iodine samples. It's just great to be outside. But it's a beautiful station. It's 800 acres. We have 3 miles of riverfront and riparian bottomland forest and a lot of different other prairie and semi-arid shrubland habitats that we can work in. We're going quite quickly. I've kind of grown up with Timberlake. It was established in 2015. We arrived in 2016. So I've always been going down there. I'm currently the director of education and outreach for the station. And so I spend a good portion of my academic year running K-12 field trip programs at the station, as well as college classes coming to the station for weekend field trips. And then we're building up the capacity to have longer summer-based classes, similar to what Lakeside has here. And I was also part of the RU program that Timberlake was a site for a few years. Here's another Lakeside connection. This is Kevin. And he was in the Lakeside class as, I think, a freshman undergraduate. And then the next year he came and was my RU student, and he worked on a voucher flora for Timberlake's Colorado River stretch that we still use today. And it was very thorough. We've only added a few since then. And then I was the PI of the RU program the last few years. And so in terms of leading it, one of the great things about that is it's a good, focused, relatively short-term, 8 to 10 week research experience for undergraduates, but there's funding support for them to actually go do that. So in terms of accessibility, that's really important because if they can't pay rent, they can't just leave for a month or more and go do something else. And then of course, Lakeside, super important. And I'm really pleased to be part of the future of Lakeside now. David already did a really good job talking about Lakeside, so I'm going to keep going. And I want to touch briefly on virtual learning because this is the other major change that's coming to higher education. Things are moving online, and so we can take advantage of that though, because it opens avenues for collaboration virtually. And there's all sorts of types of online learning platforms that other folks will talk about, but I think the discussion that started yesterday and will continue tomorrow about digitizing herbaria is a really good discussion to have. Because if you look at the flow, the workflow for digitizing herbaria, there are potentially areas there where a class could get involved to either help with the tasks and lighten the load on the herbarium curators, or take advantage of that data to do other class projects. And then the other one I want to mention real quickly is Wiki EDU, which I use quite a lot in classes. It's teaching people how to edit Wikipedia with the idea that Wikipedia has a bad rap as an unreliable source, we can just put anything. But how much strength do we have as experts where if we edited Wikipedia, it would be accurate and it would get read a lot more often than our actual publications. So what this does is students learn how to edit Wikipedia. They choose articles that need a little TLC and they make them better. And then those actually get published to Wikipedia when they're done. So they learn about scientific literacy and scientific communication. And then they walk away with a publication that they can literally pull up on their phone if they're going to prove they did it. And there's a good feeling of accomplishment there. And the quality of work also goes way up when they know that more than just the professor is going to be reading it. This was a wiki project, LNO. It was a project that identified pages, limnology and oceanography that needed editing. So I was part of that for a year. Now I do more Texas-based water resources projects, but making a wiki project is relatively straightforward. And so we could do a wiki project for diatoms that would identify both like genus pages that we could create or augment, or other pages that could use a little diatom paragraph. We can just infiltrate diatoms throughout all of Wikipedia. Everybody would know what they want. So I just want to wrap up and end on the message that we're stronger together. Because of course, no matter what we're doing, we're all really constrained by the same types of issues, time, money, and effort. And in institutions like mine, we don't necessarily have some things, but we have other things. So if we can develop multi-university collaborations that include undergraduate focused institutions, like what I do with Matt and the sea turtles, he takes care of all the genetic stuff, and then my students do the counts. And we use samples from often the same sea turtles, because I don't necessarily have all of the fancy equipment, but I have student power and I have time to do those things. And also equipment sharing. We don't have equipment. For example, Tarleton doesn't have an SEM. So Jeffrey's very generous about sharing his SEM. So you can either send him samples and he'll take photos, or you can toss all of your students in a van, drive 17 hours and go visit him in person for them to get trained on the SEM directly. And so one of the great things about our community as diatomists is that we are truly a community. I feel like NADS feels more like a family reunion in many ways than a regular conference. So we already collaborate with each other a lot, and we already innovate a lot in terms of research and education and outreach. And so I think we're perfectly posed to make diatoms like the next big thing in the classroom. So every undergraduate will graduate knowing what a diatom is. And that would also help us recruit more students to join our community, right, and expand it and even make it better. All right, and that's all I have.
So Vicki, can we go to Tarleton for the next NADS meeting?
Maybe not the next one, but give me like 5 years and we'll have more than 12 beds. So Because we are growing quite a lot in the next 5 years. The university, as part of our growth, one of the beneficial things is the university has committed money to developing the field station to be able to host people for large periods of time. So yeah, someday you can come to Texas, and I promise it won't be like this. It'll be 93 degrees instead. So
That's in January.
that's in January. Yeah, it's beautiful. Yeah, March, early March. It's great.
Thanks, Vicki. That was a great talk. We've done this wiki page stuff for class, and we last year switched to using an online database called Dryad to put all of our data. This is a field class, and we go to the same sites every year, and so we're building this long-term data, which serves the purpose of, at some point we might write a paper. And it also gives students the experience of making sure your data is nice and clean, and it's, we're in the age of having all the data publicly available, and so this has been a really good platform for us. So more of a comment.
That's a great suggestion. Yeah, thanks, Becky. Dryad. Jane.
You have part of your process where the students get the chance to speak orally in front of a lab group or other students, so they get that kind of practice there.
Yeah, so usually what I do is we do oral presentations, either independent or group, depending on what the project is. And then they'll also write a little bit independently and then write a little bit collaboratively to kind of build up those skills, because we don't all work in vacuums. Yeah.
One thing that worked for us, we have what we call the undergraduate research symposium every spring, scheduled away in the fall. And those students, we call them honors, the same kind of thing you're doing there. And it got to be such a big deal. Parents flying from around the country, just to be able to attend it. And it was actually kind of impressive quality of papers there.
That's great, because the more support from the general community, the better the programs get, for sure. Okay, I'm just going to finish with like a shameless plug that didn't really fit in the thing. I have a new game. It's called Phycoverse. I've spent the last 2 years collaborating with someone in Maine to develop it for the Algae Foundation about algal technology and how algae will save the world. It's going to come out soon, so keep an eye out for that from the Algae Foundation. All right, thank you.
Thank you.